Let's do this. The Cult of Hockey podcast by the faithful and for the faithful. I'm David Staples of the Edmonton Journal, and I'm here today with Bruce McCurdy. Hey, Bruce.
Hey, David. How are you doing today? You look a little nicked up.
Gash on my head, Bruce. You can probably see it there clear.
Yeah, I sure can, yeah.
Bruce, I play pickup hockey once a week with a group of people, and took about the hardest hit of my life in a hockey game. It was a line rush. We're heading down the ice. A guy makes a back pass to me, and I try to one-time it on net. And I'm on my feet long enough to see me. I've missed the net on my one-timer shot. And all of a sudden, one of my teammates who was also going for the puck at the same time, we collide face first. I see his face right in my face. Our helmets smash. My cage smashes into my head, and I went down. And Bruce, I thought, like, when I got up, blood would be coming from every part of my body. I honestly thought, like, how can I not be concussed? But I wasn't. I had no symptoms at all of concussion, and I've been through as a minor hockey coach concussion training protocol, so I'm somewhat aware of what those would be. But I did have this nice gash on my head to as proof to tell the tale of my manly hockey playing there.
Cage probably saved your bacon, even as it did cause you a little nick there?
Bruce, I would have had a broken nose. And last game that we played, actually, someone had one of those half shields. A lot of adult players wear the half shield. And a puck, I shot the puck, actually. He deflected it off its stick. It hit him in the mouth. And he was in the hospital. Fortunately, he didn't lose any teeth. But I lost it. I got slashed in the face years ago playing hockey, lost my front tooth. And since then, I've worn a full shield. I just think for an adult playing pickup hockey, the full shield is the only sane way to go. So.
How about neck guard? Do you wear a neck guard?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's good on you. My wife is all in on neck guards. She's constantly railing on how can they possibly play without neck guards. She's terrified someone's going to.
Well, my cousin died, Bruce.
That's
the famous, the sad story. Michael Cameron Arena is named after my cousin.
Her cousin?
Yeah. Fantastic young man, 19 years old. And and he had his neck cut in a hockey game and died. So that's kind of a heavy thing for our family to have lived with. But
no kidding.
Yeah.
I remember Mark Goodkey of the Alberta Golden Bears in a pickup game, blocking a shot, and they hit him right on the windpipe and killed him.
Yeah. So I wear a neck guard. Let's put it that way.
No doubt.
And everyone in minor hockey wears a neck guard, largely because of Michael. So that's what spurred it on, the rule change, the change in equipment. All right, let's talk about the Oilers, Bruce. We're kind of in a doldrummy kind of time with the Edmonton Oilers right now. But there is some news, some stirrings, mainly drummed up by our friend Bob Stauffer on Oilers Now, who's always good at drumming up the interest. And we saw Bob's incredible ability to drum up interest in the ratings that Kurt Levins reported this weekend. Bob's show, these were total numbers over a 2-hour period. Bob's show just crushed it in the Edmonton market in terms of viewership. So congratulations to Bob, who not only is good at stirring up controversy, but is he ever connected and a hardworking guy.
Oh yeah.
And it's second to none for Oilers News because he works for the team. He's got inside information on the team, obviously. And one of the things he was talking about this week got me riled up a little bit. And this is the notion of Oliver Ekman-Larsson being on the trade market and possibly being a target for the Edmonton Oilers. And so I've written about this, but I'm curious about your take on it, and I'll get to what I thought. But I'm just, what's your thought on this whole thing, Bruce?
My take is kind of similar to where I was on PK Subban way back in 2016. This one you can file under articles I intended to write but never wrote and wish I had written, because I think in retrospect, my opinion at the time, unpublished, was correct. That much as I admired the player, that the contract was just too big a chunk to deal with. At that time, PK was making $9 million a year, and he was, I think, by over $1 million, the highest paid defenseman in the National Hockey League. And I liked the player, but the cost, the twin cost of what it would have cost to acquire him, which the rumor at that time was Draisaitl, one of Nurse or Klefbom, and the fourth overall pick that was eventually turned into Jesse Puljujarvi, with some variation that Oilers would get the number 9 back from Montreal or not. But the cost of acquiring Subban from Montreal was immense. And then the second cost would be this $9 million cap hit stretching on into eternity. And as good as the player is, I just thought the cost was too high for what you could expect for the huge number of years remaining. And I'll say the same thing about Oliver Ekman-Larsson at $8.25 million for 7 more years. That is just a gigantic commitment. And it's one of those, I mean, it's one of those ones where if you make the wrong guess, you're sunk. What do you do? I mean, let's say that this year his step back in 2019-20, which was noticeable, is real, and he's starting, the second half of his career decline at $8.25 million, and no doubt you're talking about trade costs of giving up one of your, let's say Oilers trade Klefbom for him. And, right away you're paying an extra $4 million for an upgrade, supposedly, but how big of an upgrade and for how long is it an upgrade before the younger guy surpasses him potentially? So to me, I mean, I'm naturally conservative when it comes to big trades, so it probably won't surprise you that that one to me is, I wouldn't want to go there. Not without big cap retention. I mean, and I don't think that's in the playbook for Arizona.
What got me a little bit concerned about Bruce, this, and I'm just honestly, I'm dead set against this for the reasons that you've spelt out. I think there's a chance Ekman-Larsson, what is he earning, $8.25 million a year, and then 7 more years on that deal, 7 more years starting this year. So this year he probably performed about $3 to $4 million under that in terms of his performance. And I need to add a proviso or a caveat there. Like, I don't watch this player every day. No. I'm not an expert on this player or on any of the other number 1 defensemen in the NHL, or I don't watch them enough to have to really say with a tremendous amount of certainty what their value is. So it could well be that I'm missing something on this player. And I don't know his story well enough. I don't know his on-ice play well enough. And that it would be a really good idea to trade for this player. Like, I could be wrong on this. But man, everything, this is everything about this. This is telling me, like, don't go here. And one of the things that got me worried was the talk that Dave Tippett had coached Ekman-Larsson in the past and might be bullish on this player. And that's the kind of connection that we've seen blow up in the face of, Peter Chiarelli, Milan Lucic. Does that ring a bell? How about Ken Holland, Andreas Athanasiou? Does that also set off a little bit of an alarm for you?
Dave Tippett and Mike Smith.
Dave Tippett and Mike Smith. Yeah, this past connection to the player. He may be remembering Oliver Ekman-Larsson when Oliver Ekman-Larsson was actually in the top 15 NHL defensemen, was actually a true number 1 defenseman, as Brian Burke still called him on Oilers now, as Brian Lawton still called Ekman-Larsson. These people, smart hockey guys who watch much more of the NHL than I do, are still calling Ekman-Larsson that. But Louis DeBrusk didn't. And I thought Louis got it right, saying, well, partly right. Louis was saying Ekman-Larsson's offense is maybe still there. He's still but his defense, he's wondering about that. And, from what we've seen from my own viewings of Ekman-Larsson, I haven't been blown away at all in the games that the Oilers have played Arizona. He hasn't stood out. Has he played better than Goligoski or Jarmelson? Like, I don't know. I don't think so. He hasn't been that player that just, that kind of jumps out like a Chris Pronger off the screen, or some of these like Shea Theodore in the playoffs. If this was Shea Theodore, but this Ekman-Larsson is 29 years old. He's got this huge contract. one more thing that worries me, Bruce, is, and I don't know if there's much support at all for this trade in Oilerville. There has been a lot of support for Ekman-Larsson in the past. I remember some people recommending a Draisaitl, Darnell Nurse. Draisaitl and Darnell Nurse for Ekman-Larsson just a few years ago. What if we had made that trade? Yikes.
Yeah, well, that was the Subban package, more or less.
Yes,
that was,
same people putting that forward for Subban. And go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, I'd rather be paying Leon Draisaitl $8 million than Oliver Ekman-Larsson, and I do like the idea of a stud defenseman. But the thing is, I mean, he's the number one defenseman now, and maybe he is for 2 more years. $8.25 million runs for 7 years into his mid-30s. I mean, unless he's Nicholas Lidstrom, that is a huge gamble.
So I did, because I don't watch these defensemen, Bruce, I tried to put together just some numbers that might help guide me in my thinking, about the various defensemen and where they rate against each other. Where does Ekman-Larsson rate? So I looked at a number of statistical factors, and I'm just going to quickly run through it with you. I looked at points per 60 even strength, points per 60 power play, shots per 60 even strength. So I wanted, because offense is such an important part of the game, puck moving such an important part of the game, I wanted the 3 numbers that I thought represented offense, and also getting pucks on net. There's so many goals scored now from the point, the defenseman getting the puck through on net and it deflected. I thought that was significant enough to include it. And then the other 3 things were all time on ice metrics. And time on ice doesn't tell us the performance of a player, right, but what it tells us is how much does his own coach, whose whole livelihood is winning, how much does that coach trust that player to help him win? Because that coach has got to win, or he'll lose his job. So he's got a huge incentive to get the right call. And I looked at even strength time on ice. I looked at shorthanded time on ice as kind of to eliminate just the pure offensive guys, because they won't be used on the PK from my list. And then I hit upon what I think is actually I was really happy with this when it popped in my head. Overtime time on ice. Oh, yeah. 3-on-3, Bruce. Because who are you going to put out there? If someone's a real number one defenseman, he's going to get a ton of ice time in overtime. He's going to be out there. So, if you look at, for instance, if you look at Corsi or Fenwick, or even they'll tell you, like, if you look at the highest percentage, they'll have a lot of defensemen like Nick Holden and John Merrill and Brett Kulak. I wonder how much time on ice those guys get in overtime. So some of these on ice stats, I think, can be misleading in terms of identifying who the top 10 were. So here's the top 10 defensemen that I identified using this statistical thing, because I think any statistical analysis has to pass the smell test. Yep. So the number one, using this way of ranking defensemen, number one guy is Roman Josi. Then the list is Chris Letang, Eric Carlson, Brent Burns, John Carlson, Morgan Riley, Mark Giordano, Victor Hedman, Alex Pietrangelo, and Seth Jones. So
pretty good list. How many years is this, David?
2 years. For 2 years.
Okay.
So players like Burns and Carlson, who maybe dropped off a bit this past year, are still a little higher on the list. But so I was pretty, I'm not saying that's the right order for those players, but it's kind of the right. It's close to probably the 10 right guys. There's maybe a few guys missing. Shea Theodore's not on the list. Where did Theodore rank? I can find it. But
there's Miro Heiskanen on that list. Holy moly!
Well. He's come alive in the playoffs. Oh, he's actually number 28, Bruce, on the list.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. He's been coming on since he got in the league.
And Quinn Hughes was like 32 or 33. Now, here's the eye opener. Oscar Klefbom. What do we got here for Klefbom? 14. Oscar Klefbom was 14th using this. And 15, 16. Number 18, Darnell Nurse. Oscar Klefbom, 14. Darnell Nurse, 18. And where does Ekman-Larsson, using the same system that seemed to identify some pretty good defensemen, I have to say, 57th.
Whoa.
57th on the list. So, and behind Jacob Chikrin on his own team. So, I'm not saying that Ekman-Larsson isn't a really good hockey player and that he can't rebound, and again become maybe a number one defenseman. But from what I've seen, my own eye test from seeing him every time they play the Oilers, which is a lot, and from these numbers, I don't want to see the Oilers take on that contract, because I think that let alone give up a first pick. This contract, I believe, has negative value, and again, I could be wrong, but I'm hesitant to. I'm not excited about the idea.
That's the concern. I mean, the problem with those contracts like that is if they do have a negative value, that negative value can be a very large number if things go sideways.
Yes.
Right? I mean, you talk about negative value, people complain about the Chris Russell contract. Well, it has $4 million at most of negative value left in it, whereas the Milan Lucic contract had $24 million of negative value left in it in terms of the cap hit that was outstanding on it at the time they moved it. And so Ekman-Larsson, with 7 years to go, is what, $58 million? On that, obviously, he's going to cover some of that. But whether he comes close to covering all of it or more than all of it, like how do you play over $8 million worth of value? You practically have to be an MVP or Norris Trophy candidate to achieve that. And I'm not sure I see that in this particular player. And I do like the player. I think he's terrific.
Yes, I think if he was just, if he was like a $5 million player for 4 more years, or $6 million player for 4 years, you'd think, yeah, go for it. You give up something to get him. But so, and there's free agents, Bruce. So Torrey Krug, he ranks about 25th on my list here. He's a UFA. Tyson Barrie, I think he's a UFA. Torrey Krug.
Yes.
Tyson Barrie is a UFA. He ranked 32nd. So you could get. Right now, I'm pretty sure if you offered Tyson Barrie $6 million a year for 3 years, that's probably the high end, I'm guessing, for Tyson Barrie right now. He's probably going to get a 1-year deal. You can get 3 years of Tyson Barrie, who, according to the recent obvious kind of statistics, not advanced analytics, like the secret advanced analytics that the NHL has and nobody else has access to, Tyson Barrie ranks, publicly available numbers, he ranks higher than Ekman-Larsson. So why wouldn't you just sign Tyson Barrie to 2 or 3 years, or Torrey Krug, if you could, to even sign Torrey Krug 7 years for $6.5 or $7 million. You're better off than Ekman-Larsson at 8.
Well, depending on what you'd have to give up for him, yeah. But I don't think Krug is in that ballpark, and I don't think 7-year contracts are going to be in the cards for hardly anybody.
I agree. I wouldn't do that with Krug either. Yeah. Is Krug's a UFA? Is he not?
I believe that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So there would be no transactional cost of getting him. There would just be his contract. I think Torrey Krug might get a long-term contract at some fairly big money. So that's why I'm putting that out there.
In Boston.
Yeah, I don't think the Oilers are going to sign. Yeah, Torrey Krug. He wouldn't come here, and I don't think he'd come here. But Tyson Barrie might, and that's what I'm hoping to see. Oilers head in that direction. Bruce, one of the impacts of the Ekman-Larsson news was kind of a wave of discontent, which a fairly large number of Oiler fans have about Darnell Nurse, and based on his playoffs, based on Darnell Nurse playoffs, I can see why people are unhappy. He was terrible in the playoffs. His defensive play was a mess. And I can see, but that's just 4 games under weird circumstances. And Darnell Nurse ranks, again, 18th on this list of key statistical indicators by my own eye test and our own advanced stats. We're watching every scoring chance. We're looking who's to blame, who isn't to blame. Darnell Nurse has been the Oilers' best defenseman for some time, based on our own observation, in terms of creating high-danger scoring chances and defending them. He's been slightly better than any other defenseman in the last few years on the Oilers, especially anyone playing tough minutes. So I don't get it. What's your thought?
Well, I mean, people want a stud defenseman. Well, Darnell Nurse, if you look at some of the numbers, and certainly the usage numbers, he really stands out in this department. I mean, I looked at him over the last 3 years, and he leads the NHL in games played, tied with just one other player, Jeff Petrie.
So he's durable.
Oiler. Very durable, never missed a game in those 3 years. And the Oilers played 1 or 2 more games than a lot of teams this year. So, it's really close. There's a lot of guys at 230 plus games, but he's at 235. number 2 in the entire NHL behind only Drew Doughty in even strength time on ice for the last 3 years. And for all the griping about Nurse's contract and future contract and the one after that and all the money that he's supposed to be holding out for, he's been the 4th or 5th highest paid defenseman on the Oilers for all of those 3 years. And only now is he, with his newest 2-year deal, or the show me deal, I think that Holland signed him to. And that might be, you know, a little higher than you'd like to see. But, you know, up to this point, he's been a bargain. And he's just delivered like very large numbers. He's been on the ice for almost the most goals for, most goals against. It's all sort of an offshoot of the amount of ice time that he gets. But the fact is that he's had 3 veteran NHL coaches in that time, and Todd McClellan, Ken Hitchcock, and Dave Tippett, all of whom have relied heavily on him and used him in big minutes. This year he was partnered with a rookie for the entire season, basically, and they played the toughest minutes against the competition. They played a lot of minutes with McDavid, and I mean that obviously helps on the offensive side of things, but it doesn't necessarily help on the defensive side of the things. And the fact remains that when coaches go power on power, which is often a mutual decision of both coaches, whether it's a home game or an away game, they like to go power on power. And when the Oilers went power on power, Dave Tippett's first choice typically was Nurse and Bear to go with his power line. And, you know, at some point you have to put a little bit of stock in the coach's opinion. Of course, the naysayer will say, well, that's because they didn't have any other choices, and the Oilers' defense just isn't that good, yada yada. But actually, during the regular season, the Oilers' defense was all right. You know, they weren't great, but they were far from the worst in the NHL. And you know, the coach did have other choices, but Nurse has been a rock solid top 4 D-man for 3 years running. You can argue first pairing, second pairing, but I don't think you can argue that he's not a top 4. And it's hard to imagine. I mean, look at it from an outsider's point of view. If you were to say, okay, Edmonton Oilers have a chance to go out and get this player because he's on the trade market, and he's he's a durable player that plays 23 minutes a night, kills penalties, he's tough, he's mobile, he's got his teammates' backs, he scores points. Nurse is in the top 20 in NHL in even strength scoring over that 3-year span. It may not be traditional offense, but it's offense. He gets his points, he gets involved, he creates chaos. The Oilers take advantage of it, put the puck in the net sometimes. And if he was on another team and you look at all those shiny points, and you wouldn't think of, well, look at this thing and this thing and this thing and this thing that he doesn't do, or he does poorly, or he's never going to learn, or he ices the puck too much, or I can't make a pass, or all these things that I think people see the warts, and at a certain point they just overcome the strong points. He's a high event player. He makes mistakes. He makes good plays. You got to see both of them for what they are. And I think some of the naysayers are so focused on the mistakes, and I will grant you that in the playoffs there was more mistakes than good plays. He played poorly, and most of the Oilers' defense played poorly in the playoffs, and it's one of the main reasons that they're out.
Yeah, he was horrible, wasn't he, in the playoffs, Bruce? Game three may have been the worst game that he's played in those 3 years, honestly, when he was laying down on the ice trying to protect the lead by laying down in the passing and shooting lanes rather than being proactive. And proactive is his game, and to a fault. I mean, he'll pursue the guy rather than guard the net front, and that's a major criticism of him, and it's a fair one. Yeah, we saw that a lot.
He does that. He wins a lot of puck battles. He wins a lot of races to pucks, but he gets beaten by guys getting in behind him sometimes, and it's a part of his game. You wonder if it's ever going to come around, but I'll say he's still only 25 years old, right? I mean, this is not a player who's achieved his peak yet, and there's one or two things maybe he needs to calm down a little bit and maybe change his focus to boxing out the opponents with extreme prejudice is maybe the thing that he does best. So do it.
There was one play, Bruce, that just sticks in my mind from the playoffs. You probably remember this. I think it was Taves' goal. Can't remember which game. The big goal in the third period, but there was a face-off, and for some reason, Bear and Nurse were on the wrong sides.
Yep.
They had Nurse on the right side and Bear on the left side.
And Bear tipped it in.
And so they lose the face-off point shot. But Bear was essentially left covering two guys in front of the net because neither Draisaitl, the center, nor Nurse. Nurse followed the guy up, and I don't know if that was a planned play by the coaches. Was this another example of the Oilers coaching staff overthinking and overcoaching? Because Nurse goes charging up after the guy who had the puck instead of retreating to the net. And what happens is poor Ethan Bear's in front of the net with two Chicago Blackhawk players, can't get on either of them, so he ends up lunging for the puck and tipping it in his own net. And so one of Draisaitl and Nurse had to be there. Neither of them were there, and it was like, what? Like, who's to blame for that? Was it coaching? Was it the players? But it was the kind of mistake that we saw. We probably saw 5 to 10 goals against the Oilers in the playoffs that were foobar like that. That you just couldn't. What the hell's going on here with this team? Yeah. And Nurse was in the middle of half of those goals.
Yeah, a number of them. For sure.
So that's why I can see why. As I said at the time, I can finally see, like, the people who dislike Nurse's game the most. I could finally see what they were saying, because all of those warts grew about 3 inches in the playoffs, and they were very noticeable. So, but that's not the Nurse that I usually see and have been seeing for the last few years. And I think, is Ekman-Larsson a better player than Darnell Nurse? I think it's highly debatable right now. Is he a better player than Oscar Klefbom? I also think that's a debatable point. And so, no, I don't think you're greatly improving the team if you were going to make that trade. So I don't want to see it. Goalies, Bruce. Kurt Levins had a post, our colleague Kurt, and let me just call it up here. He was talking about team need, and this has been a discussion that fans have had. Like, what is the main team need? Is it changing the defense, bringing in a winger for McDavid? Is it a goalie? Is it a third line center? And I think I was actually encouraged by Kurt's post, because it sounds like Kurt has sources. So it sounds like the Oilers have ended up with their thought being the number one need is a goalie, a number one goalie, either to supplant Koskinen or to challenge Koskinen. And Kurt's post got into an interesting idea of actually supplanting Koskinen, which is challenging because Koskinen has 2 years left, and he has a no movement clause on his contract, I do believe. I don't think it's just no trade. And so Koskinen would have to want to move. Plus, you'd have to want to move the guy. And so the thought of moving out, like, let's say bringing in Matt Murray from Pittsburgh, or Marc-Andre Fleury from Vegas, two goalies who have had weaker numbers the last couple years than Mikko Koskinen and Matt. They were kind of names discussed in Kurt's column. I wasn't thrilled with that notion at all of trying to hit a home run with goalies that have struggled. I'm not against bringing one of those goalies in if you can make it work with Koskinen, but are they better than Koskinen? I don't know. What's your thought?
Yeah, well, it sounds like Oilers were in on the Matt Murray discussion, but the scuttlebutt is that the price was too high, so they pulled back. Which is good that you have a GM that won't get fixated on, got to get this guy no matter what,
Yeah.
Like Trelli with Lucic, for example. And that, you have to sort of say, this is the price that we're willing to pay and no higher. And I mean, we don't know, Matt Murray's a restricted free agent 1 year from unrestricted with arbitration rights. We don't know where the player's at, what his demands are. But he's a 6-year goalie with 2 Stanley Cup rings, and he's got a lot of bargaining chips in his corner. So that's one. And I mean, just because they pulled back doesn't mean that Pittsburgh might not come back and say, okay, we couldn't find a good offer, so we're going to lower our asking price a little bit. Maybe not in those words, but both teams could circle back to him. In case of Matt Murray, his numbers from the first 3 years of his career and his second 3 years are distinctly different. He was a much better stopper uh, as a younger goalie than he has been in the last 3 years, which is kind of unusual, but that's where he is. And Pittsburgh's not had as much success those last 3 years, and how much one feeds the other, who knows? But Matt Murray hasn't been winning games for them single-handedly. Let's put it that way. Uh, Marc-Andre Fleury, there's every chance. Sounds like Vegas is going to sign Leonard to a 5 years at $5 million is sort of the scuttlebutt on that, and they can't afford him without moving on from Fleury. I don't think they can afford $12 million for two goalies, but they probably can afford to eat $2 or $3 million of Fleury's contract if they move on from him. If they decide Leonard's our man, let's either eat some money or take a contract back. And I mean, that's where you could say, well, maybe Fleury for Koskinen is sort of basis for a trade, but the Oilers would have to come up with an extra $2.5 million in cap space for that move, which is pretty arguable as to how much an upgrade that is for 35-year-old Marc-Andre Fleury with 2 years to run at $7 million. Like, I mean, talk about negative contract values. That may be another example of that.
Yeah, in the last 2 years, for even strength save percentage, Koskinen and Fleury are tied. And Koskinen's a younger goalie. Still, he's trending up. Fleury is an older goalie trending down. Fleury's a much more expensive goalie. So this would be, I don't know. Like, the idea of it doesn't thrill me, put it that way. There's, especially when the market, like when you have, all these goalies that are going to be coming available. There's talk of Anton Hudobin, Thomas Greiss, Darcy Kemper, just looking at the other lists, Antti Ranta, Kurt mentioned Peter Mrazek, and the list goes. It's there's Corey Crawford, who's a UFA. There's Matt Murray, who's out there still, and I don't mind like Matt Murray. I just don't think the acquisition price. I'm glad Holland is holding the line. I don't think he's worth that much, because he might go to arbitration, get a big figure. Then he has negative value. Then he's not worth anything because you're paying him too much. Essentially, he's costing you based on his performance. So I don't want to see that big ticket goalie. The big reputation goalie scares me. The big reputation goalie and the big reputation defenseman scares me. I don't want to pay for reputation. We did that with Milan Lucic.
Those are the guys you're paying for past performance. You want to pay for future performance. And that's where, if you look at the Oilers and all the big investments they've made over the years, all the good ones have been when they've invested in a 21, 22-year-old guy coming out of his entry-level contract, like McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Hall, Eberle. Those contracts could all be defended on the basis of what they actually did in the years that followed as being value or very close to value. And all the contracts they signed with older guys coming in that had, reputations for what they did elsewhere, all blew up in their faces. So that's, I mean, if they haven't learned that lesson Pouliot, by now.
Sekera.
Lucic,
obviously. Yeah. It's been one disaster after the next. And in this cap situation in the NHL, I just don't. They've got to avoid doing it. So this is a fraught time for Ken Holland. He's got some landmines to avoid. And I think that's it. Again, I'm encouraged by the fact that I think they have identified the real place. If you're going to spend, let's say, $4 to $5 million on a player, let's say the Oilers have room to bring in one player at $4 to $5 million. I think it is probably another goalie, because we don't know if Koskinen can get it done in the playoffs. We don't know if he's going to continue to be consistently good in the regular season as he was this year. And that's a really important, huge position. And if the Oilers can get the right guy, let's say who gets a .920 save percentage in the regular season, they will make the playoffs with that.
Oh yeah.
And then they have two really good options in the playoffs to go to. And I think that the defensive situation's going to be handled internally by players like Caleb Jones, Evan Bouchard, Philip Broberg, Dmitry Samorukov, who's off to a great start in the KHL this year, William Lagesson. You've got to trust in your prospects to solve that issue. Now, I'm not saying maybe you don't move out one of the top guys and bring in on a short-term deal someone else to replace that guy in the short term. But you don't try to solve that long-term by trading for a big money player. Long-term, you solve that internally. And McDavid's wing, I don't think is necessarily solved with a big money player either, because I think you're going to find the unique player who fits in with McDavid might not cost as much. Might be the kind of the wingers who surround Sidney Crosby in Pittsburgh, who are in the $2 to $4 million range, not the $6 to $7 million range. So I think they have identified the correct need if Kurt's Post is right. Do you agree with that, or what's your thought?
Well, I think an upgrade on Mike Smith. As you say, another goalie with a 915, 920 save percentage, and they're a lock for the playoffs. And like you say, also good choices come playoff time. I'm looking with great interest at that Arizona situation with the supposed movement. And they've got two good goalies. They've actually got three good goalies. And I think they'll be moving one, and they'll use Aiden Hill as a backup, and they'll keep one of their goalies probably. They have Darcy Kemper 2 years to run at $4.5 million cap hit. Antti Ranta 1 year to run at $4.25 million cap hit. But Ranta, one of the impediments for him being traded is that they only owe him $2.25 million in real money. So from an Arizona perspective, because he's been prepaid on his contract, he's sort of one of those guys that's, bigger cap hit than actual cash owing, which is the same sort of rationale that the Oilers have for trying to trade, say, Chris Russell. If you trade Chris Russell for Antti Ranta as a sort of a basis for your trade, as I suggested in the past, well, the $2.5 million head start that you had on Chris Russell's salary is almost offset by the $2 million head start that Arizona has on Ranta's. Whereas if you traded Russell for and then again, this is blue sky, but you trade Russell for Kemper, Arizona saves $3 million in real money because they're paying the new guy, $1.5 million compared to $4.5 million, and for just 1 year. So they're and they have the cap hit. They're still inflating their salary cap, so they're meeting the minimum, but they're actually lowering their expenses by a significant amount. So that's kind of a logical trade candidate, assuming that Daryl Cates continues his past record of paying the difference on contracts. It's like having a cheat code when you're a GM making trades. If you got an owner that's got deep enough pockets to just absorb losses like that, then you can play it to your advantage.
It's one thing to be the owner who will spend to the cap, and Ken Holland has indicated that's the owner that we have right now who's going to keep spending the cap. So it's one thing to have that owner, but it's a different thing to have the owner who's going to just keep lavishing extra money, as Cates has done in recent years, right? He's lavished extra money. I'm not so sure Cates is that owner anymore, or actually very many of them are that owners anymore in the NHL. But the interesting thing, Bruce, is all of this talk about all these teams that are going to be under cap, that are going to have an internal cap of 70 million or 75 million. I mean, that radically alters the NHL's pay scales. And the Oilers, again, this is my thought, be patient, Ken Holland. Don't jump at anything, because unless it meets your internal criteria for making a good move, which should be conservative, because I think prices are coming down, and maybe you can get, let's say, when you play musical goalie chairs, Antti Ranta, or I don't think it's going to be Kemper. I think he's going to be the highest value on the market. Right. But let's say it's Anton Hudobin for whatever reason. Suddenly you can get the goalie who's had the highest even strength save percentage in the NHL the last 2 years, maybe on a 1 year deal for $2 million. Like, out of the question? I don't think it's out of the question. We just don't know it until we start to see $5 million for Leonard over 5 years sounded kind of low to me, though, Bruce. I like the
Right.
sound of that.
But
So,
setting the market low, yeah. Hudobin is kind of a special case because of his brilliant performance in the playoffs. I think that'll inflate his value. But you might get
yes,
a perfectly serviceable, uh, experienced goalie like, say, Peter Mrazek to run, 1
or
1A
Price.
with
Yeah.
Hudobin at a reasonable number and get him on the open market, or trade at a reasonable um, value going the other way. So it's they got lots of options, and it's too bad. What the biggest option that you can have in this league is cap space, and unfortunately, like there's a lot of bargains to be had this summer. I suspect on the trade market, teams willing to move on from good players who are pricey, but you got to have the cap space and the deep pockets to handle that. And the Oilers may have the deep pockets, but they don't have the cap space because they got $5 million tied up in Benoit Pouliot, Andrei Sekera, Milan Lucic, last year's bonus overages. I mean, these chickens come home to roost, and they're going to keep on roosting for a few years because unfortunately some of these commitments are through 2023.
Sins of the past, as you wrote in a recent post. And
Oh
I
yeah.
stand correct. I take your point on Hudobin's playoff performance. Probably bad example for me, like for someone who's going to get a $2 million a year contract, but you never like. We just don't know with this market because there are teams with a lot of cap space like Ottawa, New Jersey, but are they going to spend it? Like,
Hmm.
are those teams who have had low cap hits in recent years, are they willing to spend? And
Right.
there's some indication that some of them aren't. Florida. So if you go into these, suddenly $3 million of cap space might seem a lot more than it was in the past. When you don't have all these
Right.
teams counting on getting this huge amount of money back in revenue sharing, that's not going to happen as much. Suddenly $3 million might get you a really good hockey player this year, or $2 million might get you a really good hockey player, because $3 million is it's yesterday's $6 million,
Right.
at least in this
Or
market.
or a $4 million player, veteran player with name recognition who's actually only owed 1.5 million might get you another $4 million player back who's owed the 4 million. I mean, that's
Yeah,
another way you can leverage the market if you've got those kind of contracts. And the Oilers have one. It's obvious who I'm referencing there.
Chris Russell. Yeah, right,
Yeah.
correct. And yeah, his value, because Chris Russell can still help you win in the NHL. He's a good hockey player, but he's just that much more
Well,
enticing to a team.
he can help you compete and but put on it put on an NHL caliber team on the ice. He can help with that. I mean, some of these teams that are going to be bailing on real money contracts aren't looking to compete so much as they are to survive. And if there's
Hang
one
in
thing
there.
that describes Chris Russell, he is a survivor.
So, in terms of surviving this COVID pandemic, the Oilers have taken an interesting tack along with other NHL teams. It would be interesting to compare the rosters to see how many players various teams have placed. Be hard to do that, eh? But
Yeah, I'd love to see a full list. I just went through, it took me quite a while to go through just the Oilers, but to do it for all the teams, maybe there's a master list somewhere. I,
but
I
I think that
heard
yeah,
at
go
one
ahead.
point I heard the Oilers had 9 players loaned out, and they were tied with one other team that had nine,
So
and there
they've
was
done
a
a good
bunch more
job.
with 8 or 7. Yeah, I don't think there's any question that they've done a good job of finding homes. I mean, they got 3 of their top 6 prospects who are Canadian born who don't have any roots in any of these European domestic leagues. So they've managed to place over there in Evan Bouchard, Raphael Lavoie, and Ryan McLeod. And they've all turned up in different leagues overseas with not only place to play, but in 2 of those cases, the opportunity to return for training camp and compete for a job on the Oilers when the time comes. So that's good. And that the rest, I mean, part of it's just the nature of the prospect pool. The Oilers have so many European trained players. I mean, you mentioned one already, Dmitry Samorukov, Kirill Maximov, that are both on the same team, the former Central Red Army team in Moscow. You've got, Philip Broberg just returning to Sweden. You've got Philip Berglund returning to Sweden. You've got uh, Marcus Niemelainen returning to Finland. Theodor Lennström returning to Sweden, and then even a couple of guys off the NHL roster in Joachim Nygard and Gaetan Haas, who are both being returned to the teams they came from in Sweden and Switzerland, respectively, just on loan until the Oilers camp is ready. But in the meantime, these guys have a chance to play, to stay, get in better shape, and be ready to come in for camp loaded for bear, as opposed to having been off skates for 9 months. So it's. I think they've done a solid job. They're still looking for a place for Tyler Benson. They're still looking for a place for Olivier Rodrigue. There's still work to be done, but the work that has been done incrementally, player by player, I think it's my take is one to commend Ken Holland and the Oilers, and in some cases the players themselves. Raphael Lavoie, I guess, did a lot of his own work in finding a home in the Swedish First Division, and credit to him. I mean, rather have these guys playing than not playing, and the only question is, what is the risk of them, contracting COVID and having an issue? This is the big unknown, and unfortunately, some of the big unknown is the seemingly real possibility of some of these heart problems that you hear about affecting people that catch it. That's kind of scary stuff for sure.
Yeah, I see. I think the general feeling, Bruce, is that the younger, healthier people with robust immune systems tend to weather this very well, and it's older people that are more at risk of every single problem with this. So,
well, other than the heart thing, and I mean, some of the football things, mind you, you're talking about 320-pound offensive linemen when you're talking about football players. Sometimes that's not.
Yeah, what's their BMI?
Hockey, but yeah, good question. Anyway, it's a concern. Let's put it that way. That we still haven't got a full handle on this bloody thing, and what its long-term impact is going to be on people of all ages. So there's some risk.
Yeah. The other thing what's the risk of playing as compared to being a young guy not playing and living life like young guys live? Is the risk less? I mean, in the bubble, there was all the fears about the bubble. There's obviously been less risk, I think, to people inside the bubble than outside the bubble.
Zero positive tests?
That's the fact of the matter. So there was they're going to, but actually the players who are outside the bubble are at more risk. So we don't know the comparative risk for these players, whether inside these leagues or outside. Is it less? Is it more? Probably depends what city you're in and what's the level of outbreak in that city. And Sweden has had no deaths apparently for like a week, a few deaths this week. So, but will that continue? We don't. There's just all of these uncertainties around this whole thing that we do not know. It's interesting to me that all these European leagues are starting up though, and in North America there's a different mindset. Maybe because there's a different level. Maybe we're later in the whole cycle of the disease again. Who knows? Maybe we just have a different mindset. But a lot of these European leagues do seem to be getting going and are determined to get going and are getting going. And in Finland as well, Finland's had a much stricter lockdown policy than Sweden, but we have leagues in both of those countries that are getting going. So the Europeans just at this point in terms of sports seem to be more open to getting things going than North Americans, and I don't know why that is.
Well, in some places, I mean, they have different protocols in different countries. I mean, there's the Allsvenskan that Evan Bouchard's playing. The first 2 weeks of games have been postponed, and they're starting 1st of October instead of middle of September. Okay. On the other hand, you have the interesting case of Jokerit, Finnish team Jokerit that joined the KHL a couple of years ago. And here's a tweet that I put up in my post last night from Joki Nevalainen, who's a Finnish insider. And he says, only in the KHL, Neftahimik comes to Finland with COVID-19. Jokerit are put on 2-week quarantine. 5 games get postponed. Neftahimik postpones just 1 game, and now continues to play as per usual, and the Russian media blames Jokerit for messing up the schedule. Neftimik, they went home and they had 7 positive tests. Now, I'm not sure if that's all players or team personnel or whatever, but 7, it's some players for sure. And they only missed, they put off 1 game and then they went back to playing. So, but Jokerit being under the Finnish health authorities, being exposed to Neftimik, they were compelled to undergo a 2-week quarantine. So they already canceled or postponed 1 game, and the next 4 games have all been put off. So it's going to be like baseball. They're going to have some catching up to do.
Oh, those Russians. Yeah, it's every country's different. Like, who would have expected, what we know about Sweden, right? Being a very welfare state, very careful about everything, and then being the most open country in the world in terms of, well, one of them, in terms of not having a lockdown. It's just very different cultures around this public health in different countries, and it's not predicted necessarily even from past behavior. Like, again, I would have expected Sweden would have been one of the really super careful countries, but they've got this very kind of fatalistic, stoic attitude about it. Now soldier on. So, and clearly Russia's in the same boat, but Finland isn't. They're much more like we are in Canada, where they're taking a more cautious approach. So, and Bruce, my point is on this. I don't think we will know for a year or two who took the right approach. It may be as long as that before we understand which countries got it right and which countries got it wrong. If we ever understand that, it might always be in a haze of political partisan battling over the issue. So, in any case, we do know that the European leagues are starting up, and that lots of Oilers players are over there, and I think it's just fantastic work. To the extent that the Oilers have facilitated this, and I understand there's someone on staff who's working on this pretty much full time.
Imagine
that this is an excellent development for the Oilers, and I really give credit to Raphael Lavoie, who you pointed out in your post seems to have worked a lot of this on his own and found a place for himself to play. That was just for his own development as a player. It's just fantastic that he took matters into his own hands.
It's one thing the NHL teams do have in matters like this is experience from all those friggin' lockouts. 3 different times that NHL stopped.
Yes, it's true.
No good reason. And they wound up having to place a lot of their players overseas, including a lot of NHLers. And they're a little harder to place this time because, for example, the Swedish Hockey League, which would be a very popular landing spot, was so messed up by the last lockout where they had a bunch of NHLers and they all up and left halfway through the season to go back to the NHL, that they kind of passed a rule about it and said that, if you're signing a 1-year deal in Sweden, you're playing the whole season with very few exceptions. I think, for instance, Broberg has an exception because he was in the league last year and he's carrying on with his same team, that he can be released for training camp, is how I understand it. And honestly, I'm not sure that I got all the details right on every player because it's not spelled out anywhere particularly well. But my understanding is Broberg, because he was a SHL player with Skellefteå last year, and he's back with that team now, he can negotiate a release to at least come over to training camp and compete for a spot. And other guys, Lavoie, he's there for the year. And the thing there, of course, is that their year will be over in March or April like normal, assuming that there's no postponements, no lockdowns. And those players can come back, and the NHL might still have 2 months to go. So those guys might potentially be facing a super long season, but have a chance to, come back and still get your, NHL cup of coffee or your AHL time in addition to the season of training in Europe. So there's possible good outcomes from all this.
If it's Rodrigue and Skinner, the goalies, I think they should be, if they have a chance to go there and they have to stay the whole year, if that's the deal, they should go and stay the whole year, because they both need a full year of development still. And if they're going to especially if they're going to go get playing time, let's say in the same league that Bouchard's in, which I'm avoiding pronouncing.
Allsvenskan?
Yeah, the Allsvenskan, is that it?
Mm-hmm.
If they could go there and get playing time, like half the playing time, they should go, be there the whole year. With Benson, Tyler Benson, it's a bit more complicated because he doesn't have a real chance of making the Oilers. The window's there right now. So he could maybe go to, like Bouchard did, go to the Allsvenskan and get that opportunity to be on a team and practice. And so I hope they can quickly work that out. He'd be a very good player in that league, Tyler Benson would be. Mm-hmm. And but you could see the hesitation of a team taking on too many guys like that for a short amount of time. It's almost like a favor that the Swedish teams are doing. Although, who knows? They could have Evan Bouchard in the end, they could have him for 4 or 5 months. We still don't know, right?
They might have him for the whole season. Who knows? Or they might have him for they might. Or you could see a scenario where the Oilers bring him back for camp, decide he's not ready for the team, and send him back.
Yeah.
To play out the season. And in the meantime, they've got a top 10 NHL draft choice on their team in the Swedish second division. I mean, there's positive. I mean, their fans get to see a pretty good player for starters. So
yeah, they get more excitement for the team. Like 100%. Tyler Benson, he's the best player. He goes to any Allsvenska team, and he's probably the best player on the team, or the second best plair, right?
Yeah, he'd be one of them.
So hopefully that happens soon. Alrighty, Bruce. Well, thanks for talking today.
All right. Well, thanks for listening, everyone. Get over that head wound there, David. We'll see you in, I'm sure, better shape by this time next podcast.
I was just thinking of my friend. He smacked his head water skiing. Mm-hmm. And we called him for a while Bobby Bruce Head.
Oh. I didn't ask you, how did your teammate fare? I mean, he went head to head with you. Did he get banged up as well?
He was fine. Fine. Yeah, he was apologizing, but really it was both. You have a head-to-head collision like that, it's both our faults. We were both coming right at each other. Needed to have our heads up a little bit more. But what you find when you actually play hockey is how absolutely utterly difficult a game it is, even at the lowest possible level of hockey, and how claustrophobic it is when you get the puck. The tunnel vision is extreme. So that's my own experience playing hockey. And it's good to play the game to remind myself, of just what a challenging game hockey is. So, all right. Thanks, Bruce. Thanks for talking. And in the meantime, and in between times, this has been another edition of the Cult of Hockey podcast.